Born in 1858, Frederick Stanley Arnot was a British missionary who spent over 10 years in sub-Saharan Africa among the natives. He did much to help establish missions in what are now Angola, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. When Arnot arrived at the town of Shashong, he met their current king, by the name of Kama. Kama had accepted Christianity and put down almost all of his people's former customs. There was one custom, however, that prevailed, despite Kama's greatest efforts: the sacrificing of children. At Shashong, any infant that was born deformed, or considered to be defective in some way, was immediately put to death. Very seldom were twins allowed to live. During the birth of a child, if any peculiar circumstance occurred, for example, the call of certain animals or birds, the newborn was executed. The ordinary way that they would kill these infants was by pouring boiling water down their throats until the executioners were certain that their lives were extinguished. The tiny, lifeless corpse was then tossed out to the wolves. When visiting the town of Sheshek, Arnot observed that 3/4 of the population were the absolute property of the other 1/4. Human sacrifice was practiced in Sheshek, along with regular witch trials where the condemned were burned alive. Witch trials were often used by the rulers and the rich to dispose of potential threats or subverters among the lesser castes. On his 3rd day in the town of Lialui, he learned how witches were unveiled. A large fire was kindled, and a pot of water was placed over it. 2 people being accused of being witches were made to wash their hands in the boiling water, and if, after 24 hours, the skin of their hands came off, they were deemed guilty and executed. 24 hours later, Arnot watched in horror as they led the 2 allegedly guilty witches to be burned alive before a howling, cursing crowd. Arnot was afterwards even more appalled when he found out that scenes like this were of almost daily occurrence. Spending so much time in Africa and being intimately acquainted with the natives, Arnot became very familiar with their beliefs and had a thorough understanding of their Weltanschauung or worldview. The natives believed that whatever position a man held in his temporal physical life would be maintained in the spirit world, or afterlife as well. Good and bad, righteous and sin, and so forth, were not in their creeds. If a man died a slave, he could look forward to that same occupation when his soul left his body. If a man died a chief, he remained a chief, etc., etc. He said that the natives' pride of position was consummate. They believed that it was impossible for a chief or freeman to come down to the level of a matblanca, which was the lowest order of slaves. Arnot wanted nothing more than to be able to preach to the slaves of Africa, but he was not allowed. "Those are not people," said the African masters. "They are our dogs." Among the Barats, nothing of importance could be sanctified without a human sacrifice, in most cases, that of a child. First, the child's fingers and toes were cut off. The blood gushing from their crudely amputated digits was collected and used to sprinkle on a boat, drum, house, or whatever object was in mind. The child was then killed, ripped up, and thrown into a river. The Barats also burned people alive for being perceived as witches. Not a day passed before someone was condemned and burned alive. One of their execution's methods for perceived criminals was to bound the person's hands and feet, and then leave them near a large nest of driver ants, where in a few days the person's bones were picked clean. Quoting from Arnot, "The details of scenes that I have been forced to witness in this line are too horrible to put on paper. Many a guiltless victim is marched off to the horrid pile. A few hundred yards from my hut there lies a perfect Golgotha of skulls and human bones, fearful to look upon. And the remembrance of things I have seen done to captives makes the blood run cold." End quote. Among the Mashukalumbi, it was a custom for warriors to string up by the neck to tall trees the little children they have taken captive, a spectacle that gave entertainment to the whole countryside. While staying at Old Ketama, the chief, also named Ketama, sent Arnot what he believed to be a gift: a slave woman with her infant in her arms. Arnot asked as a favor if they would take the woman back, send her to her home village, and to never enslave her or anyone else again. Ketama didn't quite understand the message, thinking that Arnot had refused the woman because she was full grown. He asked Arnot not to fret. he would send him a boy or girl slave on the following day. The nature and extent to which slavery was practiced in Africa, by Africans, on Africans, can be seen in the following quote of Arnot. The men he is referencing were those he hired to assist him in his travels. Quote, I gave each of my men so many beads, besides cloth, promising them that I would try and procure for each one a small tooth of ivory before they left, provided they did not spend the beads and cloth in buying slaves, but kept them for food. You can imagine, then, how disappointed I was when I saw them, without exception, selling all they had, even stripping themselves, and putting on sackcloth to find the wherewithal to buy slaves. Thus, the number of mouths in my camp has been trebled, while the means to provide for them has been reduced. The camp has ever since been a regular slave pen. I have put my hut outside of it, and given the people of the country to understand that I have nothing to do with this slave buying and tying up business. End quote. Arnot met the great MCD at Garenganze. Large companies of women stood behind and at his sides, who he introduced to Arnot as his wives. He had 500 wives in total, his 2 head wives being mulatto. After all of the courtesies and pleasantries were exchanged, he sent for his nurse, who brought out an 18-month-old child. This little boy, by the name of Kota, was given by MCD to Arnot as a gift. During his stay at Garenganze, one of MCD's quote-unquote small wives was attacked by a leopard while working in the field. Her cries elicited assistance, and the leopard was effectively chased off, but MHRD's wife died shortly after. MCD at once planned to seek revenge on the leopard by killing it with poison. To Arnot's shock, instead of using a goat or dog as the poisoned bait, MCD used his dead wife's body. There was a large number of animal attacks and deaths at Garenganze, a major factor being the people's custom of throwing dead slaves out into the woods. The animals, being attracted to their corpses, became bold over time and attacked slaves and laborers working in the fields. Arnot visited an Arab camp in Garenganze and observed the large number of slaves they had purchased from MCD and his people. They were all secured by the neck with heavy forked sticks. Quoting from Arnot, while there I saw the Arabs buy a man for 10 yards of calico. They give, they told me, 12 to 16 yards for women and young lads. Full-grown men were not so valuable, as they are untamable and able to make their escape. After the bargain had been completed, 3 stout Zanzibaris came forward, seized the man they had bought, threw him on his face on the ground, drew his hands behind his back in the most cruel way, and bound them tightly. Then, with a blow on the side of the head, they ordered the poor fellow, who never uttered a word all this time, to get up and go before them. He would have to lie bound with this cord until a taming stick was manufactured to place on his neck. The weight of these sticks is very great, but to my mind, the discomfort of their position during the day, when they are allowed to sit up with the end of the stick resting on the ground in front of them, is nothing compared to what they must suffer at night. Then they are made to lie down, the stick being kept fixed, and pinning their neck between its fork to the ground, its upper end fastened to the roof of a hut, shed, or branch of a tree. End quote. Arnot is here quoted again, telling of the treatment of infants and small children in the African slave trade system. Yesterday, I had another child brought to me. The poor thing belonged to a blacksmith here, who some time ago sold its mother for corn to the king's executioner. The corn was not enough to cover the price of the child, so he kept it out of the bargain. The fact was, the hangman did not wish a slave with a baby on her back, so would not buy the child, though an extra basket of corn would have sufficed. The blacksmith, who has no wife, found he could do nothing with this baby, and instead of knocking it on the head, as the custom here is, for who would buy so young a thing, he sent it to me, asking me to give a goat for him. I could not help myself in the matter, so I sent a young goat in exchange. Poor little boy, we will call him Willie. He had been deceived, for they said they were taking him to his mother, and he cried long and bitterly. Entwala ko, mama, meaning, take me to mother. The question of these children harasses me a good deal, and often, I don't know what to do. Little children here have really no market value, and a woman burdened with a child is a less desirable article of purchase than one with hands and shoulders free. The raiding parties kill off all small children found among their captives. The body of a fine little boy was picked up only a few days ago beside the Arab camp. The owner had doubtless taken him the round of all likely purchasers, probably including me among the number, and then thrust a spear through him as a useless burden on his hands. Another little boy, whom I refused to take last year, was deliberately starved and thrown out to the wolves. A young man named Salumbo had charge of a field close by my cottage. Being interested in meetings held at my place, he moved his hut from the far to the near side of the field. His wife was a slave woman, and had a little child, to whom I had taken quite a fancy. And in passing their hut on my way to the villages I used often to take the child in my arms, and spend a few minutes in playing with it. During my absence, on one occasion the mistress of Salumbo's wife carried out a threat she had made long before, and sold her with her child. The husband was powerless to interfere on behalf of either. One of a company of traders bought the woman, and started at once for Another man, however, hearing that this woman had been sold, wished to exchange for her a younger slave, who was perhaps of more value, though less muscular, as he wanted an able-bodied woman to cultivate his fields. The betrayer was willing to make the exchange, but reminded the man that he had brought nothing for the child. The latter at once said he did not want the child, but as it was so young, he thought it ought to be included with the mother in his bargain. The men were unable to come to terms. So, to prevent more ado, the child was taken from the mother's arms. Its head was dashed against a tree, and it was thrown into the river. Thus, the difficulty was got over, and the women were exchanged. The poor mother's grief at the loss of her child may be imagined. Had I known the peril that this little one was in, I certainly should have secured it in some way or other. But to know where and when I ought to draw the line baffles me. I cannot allow myself to be involved in slave buying. That is clear. What are the points of difference between buying and redeeming? If it is lawful to buy, it must be equally lawful to sell. One can redeem a grown-up person and let him go, but this cannot be done with a child whose parents are enslaved. The owner of the mother might take him at once and sell him again. Of course, alone, I cannot look after more than a very few, and that settles the question so far." End quote. While in Garenganze, Mesidi's favorite wife, Kitompa, returned from an 8-month-long war campaign in the Luba country. The warriors in her party walked slowly while singing a war song, the skulls of their victims being carried in their hands and/or dangling from their waists. One warrior even had a skull hanging from his teeth. As they had marched out of Mesidi's enclosure 8 months prior, destined for battle, 2 people were sacrificed, their blood being smeared and used in conjunction with their idols and fetish practices. Arnot is here quoted on Mesidi's human sacrifice customs. Mesidi's salt pan is opened once a year with a religious ceremony, and human victims are sacrificed in order that the process of salt gathering that year may not be interfered with by the spirits of departed chiefs. A similar course is pursued in nearly all their occupations. They seek to prevent disaster, and to assure themselves of success by means of human sacrifices. And it is indeed surprising to see how even the poor victims themselves seem to enter into the spirit of the delusion, taking farewell of their friends, and going quietly to be sacrificed, and many of them even delighting in being called to do so at the king's pleasure. No especial selection appears to be made in providing the victims, but the king merely says that one and another are to be taken and slaughtered. End quote. Arnot is again quoted, this time on the slavery practices at Garenganze. Children of slaves are treated as nobody's children, though they are the property of somebody. The life of a slave can be compensated for by cloth, goats, or other things of like value. But the life of somebody's child can only be compensated for by 5 slaves. The actual slaves of the country are either captives newly taken in war, or the children of slaves. But their descendants after the 3rd or 4th generation are reckoned as freeborn. War is, to a great extent, carried on for the sake of making captives, and on account of this, the king has often difficulty in restraining his soldiers from extending their raiding expeditions mercilessly, when once he has banded them together to attack any chief. Large numbers of slaves are brought into the capital every year by returning war parties, and are sold chiefly to Arab traders from Zanzibar, and to Ovimbondu traders from Bu. Strong young men have been sold for 10 or 12 yards of cotton cloth. Children able to walk are perhaps worth a little, but infants are considered a drug in the market, and it is generally to the advantage of the slave dealers to make away with them. They will not often allow a mother to carry her own child, thinking to employ her more profitably by making her carry ivory or food. And so these little ones are generally cast out to the hyenas or thrown into the rivers. One year, when MSED's warriors were ransacking the district around Katapina, they surprised and carried off a number of children who were playing and bathing in a pool near their town. Among them were 2 girls, Mupo and Delunga, who had been fast friends and constant playmates. But the rough hands of MSED's soldiers now separated them, and they were carried off in different directions. 3 years after, I happened to be sitting in MXID's yard talking with him, when a company of slaves were brought in. They were the belongings of someone who had recently died and were brought to MSED to distribute among the relatives of the deceased man. The youngest of the slaves was a little girl, about 9 years of age. She was suffering from painful ulcers on the soles of her feet. After giving away the healthy ones of the number, MSCD turned and asked if I could do anything with this suffering child. So I took her up to my cottage, dressed her sores, and after a little care and nursing, she completely recovered. A few months later, I happened again to be sitting beside MCD early one morning, when he asked me to take breakfast with him. We had not sat long before a little girl entered the yard and threw herself down at some distance from the chief's feet, and did obeisance by rubbing dust on her forehead and arms. MCD told her to look up, and asked where she came from, and what she wanted. She said that she had run away from her mistress because she had been beaten severely the day before. It seems that she had travelled all night from the Lanzala district, 6 or 8 miles down the Some of MCD's breakfast lay by me, which I handed in pity to the poor thing, and in a short time I rose up and left. Upon looking back, I saw the little girl following me, in charge of one of MSID's young men, who told me that MSID had sent the child after me, saying that if she was afraid of being beaten, she had better follow the white man. Soon she came with me to my cottage. I handed her over to the care of the other little girl, Mwipo, when, to my astonishment, they flew into each other's arms, embracing one another, and weeping. The 2 Luba freeborn children had met again in my cottage, after each had passed through her own 3 years of unmixed sorrow and hardship. It was several days before I was able to do anything with them, so continually did they hang round each other's necks." End quote.